Tjo. Jag tror bara dyka in nu. Känner alla som kommit in än så länge. Ska vi se. Sådär ja. Nu ska vi se. Okej, så. Yes. Det här ser ändå ut att fungera bra. Jag ska bara rigga upp allting här. Ska vi se. Så att det laggar lite grann. Tjena alla som kommit in än så länge. Ska vi bara styra upp allting. Så. Okej, nej men då ska vi nu komma in här. Jag ger alla ungefär 1 minut till att komma in. Jag ska bara se till så allting fungerar bra. Första gången jag kör live här nu från USA så testar ut allting lite. Men det ser ut att funka. Sen så vi drar igång om någon enstaka minut här när väl räntebeskedet kom in här om en liten stund. Vi ska se. Yes. Okej, då ska vi nu vara klar för att starta helt enkelt. Yes, nej, men låt oss dra igång. Jag ser att det kanske är lite hackigt. Ni får ge mig lite feedback om det blir för hackigt så får jag försöka att optimera det till nästa gång. Men jag tror ändå vi ska kunna få det att fungera hyfsat. Men ja, tjena allihopa, välkomna till den här veckans livestream. Vi kommer att kolla lite teknisk analys, men det kommer främst vara idag att vi följer räntebeskedet från USA vid 20.00 om 5 minuter. Sen kollar vi lite teknisk analys, tar lite Q&A-frågor mellan 20.00 och 20.30. Och sedan 20.30 så livestreamar vi Powells tal helt enkelt fram tills det slutar. Det brukar pågå ungefär runt en 30 till en 45 minuter. Så någonstans där kommer det då att sluta och då drar vi en liten recap efter det. Så just nu kommer vi vänta in räntebeskedet som ska dyka in här nu om en 5 minuter helt enkelt. 5 minuter till räntebesked så får vi se hur det dyker in. Med största sannolikhet så kommer räntan vara oförändrad, till 99% så kommer den vara oförändrad. Så just, vi kommer se volatilitet när det här kommer ut, men det kommer inte finnas någonting jättemycket att säga för att det kommer helt enkelt vara neutralt när räntan kommer in, förmodligen till alltså sannolikhet och svåra reaktioner. Okej, jag fattar, bilden laggar lite, jag ska försöka optimera det till nästa gång, jag ska se om jag kan uppgradera internetet på något sätt, helt enkelt. Men det får vara så här idag, ljudet fungerar bra i alla fall, så bilden kanske laggar lite, men vi får optimera det nästa gång. Men ja, räntebesked här nu med 4 minuter. Som sagt, vid beskedet kommer bli lite volatilitet upp och ner, men det är lite större intressant när väl Powell drar igång vid 20:30. Kollar vi i nasdaq just nu och det man vill hålla koll på. Jag kommer inte trada personligen eftersom jag livestreamar, jag brukar inte göra det, bara ibland. Men internet är så här dåligt så kommer det absolut inte gå. Men det jag hade bevakat om jag skulle kolla trades här nu, till exempel i nasdaq. 20 maj här är väldigt, väldigt tufft motstånd. Så ser vi att det pushar på uppåt, så kan man hålla koll upp här mot 270 vid 20 maj, strax under 300, där har vi tufft motstånd. Även upp mot 300, 330, 340 som mest. Så har man longs och vi går uppåt, kan bli tuffa motstånd vid båda de nivåerna att hålla utkik på. Och short kan bli lite short möjlighet också emot Powell. Vi kommer nu se mycket upp och ner. Börjar vi falla på Powell sedan, så vill man hålla koll på här nere vid 15,1 ungefär. Det finns väldigt, väldigt bra stöd där, så det är absolut en intressant nivå att hålla koll på. Skulle vi börja falla väldigt, väldigt hårt och vi börjar falla över 1%, då kommer det vara 15 000 nivån här nere var det som är mest intressant att hålla utkik på. Så de mest intressanta stöden här just nu idag kring Powell, det kommer vara 15,1 neråt. Bryter vi den så är det 15 000 som gäller. Uppåt så är det mest intressant här vid 270 följt av 330-340 ungefär. Det är väl de som har haft lite extra utkik på i nasdaq. Kollar vi S&P 500 så ser vi att nivåerna som man vill ha lite extra utkik på där. Det kommer också vara 20 i maj-nivån. 20 i maj här kommer bli väldigt, väldigt intressant så hur den reagerar vid 4,470 ungefär. Och skulle vi bryta över den, men då är det faktiskt ganska fritt upp till 4,490. Kan man nog sätta ner den, 4,490. Så du har koll på den nivån där. Neråt, ja men då har vi stöd här nere vid 4,420 ungefär. Jag tror inte den kommer att brytas idag. Där finns väldigt bra stöd. Skulle den gå neråt efter det så kommer det finnas stöd här nere. Men jag har svårt att säga att vi skulle falla så hårt idag om inte Powell säger någonting väldigt, väldigt negativt. Så de två nivåerna här och upp, eller de tre nivåerna är väl de jag har mest koll på i S&P här nu inför räntebeskedet. Och det är väl de två som är öppna. OMX är stängd, tysken är stängd, så de europeiska indexen är ju stängda helt enkelt. Så ingenting direkt som blir intressant där nu. Vi ser under dagen att vi har pendlat mycket uppåt, det var så hela veckan. Det var mycket sillesrörelser, har vi gått uppåt, sen har vi fallit vid öppning och sen har vi börjat återhämta oss. Och ja, men den har rört sig i princip så nästan varje dag denna veckan nu inför Fed. Men nu är det dags, nu är det räntebesked här om 40 sekunder. Så vi får se hur den vill dyka in här nu. Vi ska kolla på Forex Factory. Det här jag personligen brukar gilla av att följa dem live. Jag tycker den är en simpel sida, presenterade väldigt bra. Så den här sidan gillar jag personligen och följer alla rapporter. Vissa använder investing.com, vissa använder denna. Jag tycker den är nice, enkel, simpel, ställ ut det bra. Så vi har räntebeskedet här om 20 sekunder. Som sagt, allting lutar mot att det kommer stå 5,50 här också. Alltså att vi ser en paus i höjning helt enkelt. Skulle vi få någonting annat så kommer vi se rejäla reaktioner. Men det brukar ofta stämma de här preliminära siffrorna. Så vi förväntar oss 5,50 här nu. Annars kan det balla ur lite. Så vi testar. Okej, 5,50. Så kom in enligt förväntan. Och ja, nu kan vi hålla koll lite på stöd och motstånd här nu. För det här är en helt neutral. Marknaden har fullständigt prisat in det här. Så det här är ingen chock överhuvudtaget. Så vi kommer nog pendla lite upp och ner här nu. Men som sagt, 15,100 är en intressant nivå för stöd som man kan hålla koll på neråt. Det är mycket möjligt att den testar den nivån och kanske sen studsar lite. Det är absolut inte omöjligt, så man kan absolut hålla koll på det sen. Eller om vi nu kommer ner dit, så finns det väldigt bra stöd. Lowsen vi hade häromdagen, det var ju faktiskt ända ner vid, ja men strax ovanför 5070. Det kan också bli så att den vill ner dit, men jag tror ändå 1500 kan hålla ganska bra här nu innan Fed i alla fall. Och sedan får vi får se vad Powell håller på vill säga sedan när han dyker in i sitt tal, för det är där vi verkligen kan se de här stora chockningarna. Om han säger att nej, men vi kommer höja minst en gång till i år, eller att vi kommer inte sänka förrän Q3, Q4 nästa år, ja men då kan det bli lite negativitet. Skulle han annars säga att nej, men vi kommer nu börja sänka räntorna, kanske slutet på året eller tidigt på nästa år, ja men då kanske det blir lite positivitet. Här ser vi Nasdaq testa 15100 nivån just nu. Skapar ganska bra stöd direkt. Kan säga att den verkligen vänder precis på linjen här just nu för tillfället som vi kollar på. Finns som sagt väldigt fint stöd där. Hade jag tradat för just nu så hade jag nog kikat på en lång faktiskt. Kan nog bli en lite studs där. Redan återhämtat sig 0,2%. Fin trade som redan hade varit en ganska bra vinst. Så hade jag tagit en trade här nu så hade jag redan varit inne här vid 15100 vid den nivån. Studsat upp så här. Hade nu flyttat upp min stopploss lite grann. Förmodligen till break-even. Jag har nu lagt den här på plus minus 0. För går vi ner och retestar här igen, ja men då ska vi nu fortsätta neråt. Så gärna plus minus 0 och sen kan man satsa på att vi ska återhämta lite av det här igen. Profit target kanske mot 15200, 170. Något sånt hade jag nu stått upp en trade om jag hade varit här nu. Men vi ser ett initialt studs här nu vid 15100 i alla fall. Så får vi se vad som händer där. Är det fortfarande USA? Ja, det är jag, och jag kommer vara det hela året i princip. Jag kommer vara här i 3 månader. Så kommer vara kvar här i 3 månader i USA, så kommer vara ett bra tag till. Som sagt, väldigt fin trade som man hade kunnat ta här nu i Nasdaq. Man hade till och med kunnat ta sin profit redan nu. Beroende på hävstång upp ungefär 0,25%. Snabb fin trade på bara 1 minut. Men ja, låt oss ta lite av era önskemål. Som sagt, vi kör lite teknisk analys nu en halvtimme, och sedan så kör vi Fed vid 20:30 när Powell drar igång. Och som sagt, det ber om ursäkt att bilden laggar lite. Mitt wifi här i USA är inte det bästa. Jag ska försöka optimera det till nästa onsdags webinar helt enkelt. Nu kommer det att det ska vara USA hela året. Jag spenderar faktiskt väldigt mycket tid i USA. De som har följt mig kanske längre vet om det, men jag har familj i USA. Jag gillar att vara här. Förra året så var jag i USA i 5 månader. I år är jag här i 3 månader. Så jag brukar spendera några månader om året här. Tradingen fungerar bra. Nu är jag tillbaka. Jag var i Nevada mitt i öknen hela förra veckan, och där fungerade inte internet överhuvudtaget. Här var jag är nu fungerar internet faktiskt ganska bra. Inga problem alls att göra vanliga saker som trada eller hålla på. Allting mitt fungerar väldigt bra. Just livestream kräver väldigt mycket på internet. Så livestreaming är det som tar lite stryk här nu bara. Men min egna trading kommer inte vara något problem. Bodde i USA 3 år, älskade. Ja, USA är riktigt nice. Jag älskar att vara här också. Men låt oss kolla lite aktier. Nibe. Som sagt, jag hoppas inte allt för laggigt. Helt enkelt. Nibe kommit ner till en ganska intressant stödzon som mycket väl kan bli att det studsar, och den vänder verkligen exakt på nivån som vi hade sagt ut. Och det är ju Fibonacci 0618 här som jag kikade specifikt på, där vi ser att det vänder för tillfället. Finns väldigt bra stöd här nu i Nibe faktiskt. Här vid 69,70. Vi har de tidiga lowsen från 2022 och vi har Fibonacci-nivå. Så Nibe, mycket fint stöd här vid 69. Kan absolut säga att den studsar lite här nu vid de här nivåerna. Och men det är en väldigt fin stödnivå. Vi ser att en positiv reaktion idag också. Så kan absolut studsa uppåt. I alla fall till 76 här nu. Kan ända upp här mot 78. Det kan också gå högre sen. Men initialt så känns det som att den i alla fall kan studsa upp till de här topparna här vid 76 helt enkelt. Så lite intressant att hålla utkik faktiskt på Nibe här denna veckan tycker jag. För jag tycker absolut det kan se positivt ut. Så länge inte marknaden kollapsar helt på Powells tal sen, så tror jag absolut det kan finnas lite bra möjligheter i NIBE i veckan. Avanza, låt oss kika Avanza, den har också fallit en del. Ja, Avanza som har kommit ner till stödnivåer. Vi har ganska intressant stöd här också i Avanza faktiskt. Jag gillar nivåerna, det gör jag. Och här är vi lite längre i utvecklingen än det vi såg i NIBE precis. Det vi såg i NIBE här nu, där hade man kunnat säga att det är ungefär den här dagen här, den 11 september, det stora gröna candlet. För att vi har också ett bra stöd här, Fibonacci-nivå, samma nivå faktiskt 0618. Och sedan efter vi såg det här så har vi nu en bra chans upp att testa mot 20 i maj, och det är det vi ser här nu. Så fanns en bra lång här nere. Här vid 20 i maj runt 208 kan det bli lite tufft nu. Men det kan också bli att vi ska återhämta oss lite. Kan fortfarande finnas en del uppsida kvar. Som sagt, gillade lången här nere upp mot i alla fall 20 i maj. Men kan vi bryta ovanför 20 i maj i Avanza, så tror jag att vi jobbar oss minst mot, vad ska vi säga, vad vi närmsta större motstånd. Bryter vi 208, bör vi ta oss till 215, potentiellt även ända upp mot 218. Så jag hade haft koll på 20 i maj i Avanza, nivån här nu. Kan vi bryta över 208, stänga ovanför den nivån, men då tar vi nu taget på den här zonen här. Skulle jag tro. Blir här motstånd, ja men då ska vi förmodligen ner och testa låsen i alla fall en gång till. Men det finns ett bra stöd här, så mycket väl kan fortsätta hålla. Bryter vi över 20 i maj, skulle jag haft koll på den här zonen här som nästa target. Hexatronic. Inte riktigt kommit ner till den zonen som jag har pratat om. 50 nivån är väl där som jag kikar på. Lite long trades. Och vi har inte kommit ner dit än. Kommer ner till 50. Det är det jag sagt i Hexatronic. Där kommer jag kolla på lite longs. Men vi får se hur priset rör sig när vi väl är där nere. Men så Hexatronic ser fortfarande ganska bearish ut i min syn. Men kan det komma ner till 50 här och vi börjar bygga upp lite positivitet i priset, då kan det absolut bli intressant för longs, där det finns lite stöd här från 2021. Så 50 nivån, det är när jag bevakar Hexatronic. Kan vi komma ner dit, då kikar jag på lite potentiella long trades. Oljan, låt oss kika på oljan. Oljan, det ser ut som vi kan ha satt en topp här nu faktiskt. Upp här vid 96. Väldigt, väldigt tydligt candle. Vi ser ofta som den här bearish pinbaren i toppen innan vi vänder neråt. Så jag skulle ändå vara bearish här nu de kommande dagarna för oljan. Kanske att vi retracear neråt tillbaka mot 90 nivån. Skulle jag väl inte säga är omöjligt. Så jag vill faktiskt ta in den här nivån. 9 EMA, den kan faktiskt vara intressant ibland att kolla på. 9 dagars exponential moving average. Vi ser faktiskt att det är där den får ett exakt stöd idag. Det var lite det jag tänkte också. Så det finns lite stöd här som kan hålla, men jag skulle nu vara lite övervägande bearish. Vi har haft en väldigt, väldigt fint lägg uppåt här nu. Tydligt negativt candle på tisdagen. Så nu ändå, vi har lite stöd här runt 93, men jag skulle ändå vara lite övervägande bearish de kommande dagarna, att den kan andas lite och komma ner. Kanske ner mot 90-91 nivåerna i oljan. Embracer. Spontant ingenting jag gillar jättemycket i Embracer här. Verkligen long eller shorts. Mycket tidigare nivåer här som jag kollat på innan, men spontant ingenting jag gillar jättemycket här. Det är det inte. Vi har många tidigare nivåer. Nej, men här ser jag ingenting jag gillar just nu. Det enda jag ser spontant, det är att vi ser ut att ha en ganska tydlig trendmotstånd där, lite uppåt i den här stilen. Det är väl det enda jag kan uppdatera lite med, att vi har ett tydligt motstånd uppåt här. Kan vi bryta den uppåt, ja men då kan vi nog satsa lite uppåt mot 29 igen. Men spontant inte jättemycket jag gillar här. Man kan hålla koll på motståndet här, stödet här. Bryts den nivån, ja men då ska vi nog falla hårdare neråt mot 23, potentiellt mot 20. Bryter vi den här, ja men då jobbar vi oss nu mot 29. Men spontant, jag gillar inte den, hur det rör sig här nu, Embracer, så jag har personligen varit lite avvaktande. G5 är faktiskt en aktie som jag har kollat en del på, för den är nere vid en intressant stödzon. Så intressant. Tog jag upp den på market? Jo, det gjorde jag. Jag tog upp den på market updaten, va? Jo, jag gjorde det. Jag tänkte det. Nej, men G5, jag tog upp den på market updaten i söndags. Då väl kom ner till en ganska intressant stödnivå här. Tycker det är ganska fin stödnivå. Jag ska faktiskt kolla om vi kan få någon Fibonacci-nivå som linar upp. Spontant ser det kanske inte ut som det. Vi ska se. Nej, det var det jag tänkte. Vi har inga nivåer som linar upp alls. Så det är ganska irrelevant här nu. Men en ganska fin stöd här nu i G5. Jag gillar stödnivån faktiskt. Och zoomar vi in i daily syn, så kan vi se att vi börjar få lite positivitet idag. Jag tycker inte det här price action ser jättepositivt ut än. För vi ser här att priset försöker återhämta sig. Vi försöker gå uppåt. Men den trycks ner hela tiden. Så jag vill inte tycka att det ser positivt ut än. Det gör jag inte. Men vi befinner oss i en intressant stödzon. Här kan bli intressanta nivåer för longs. Så det är fortfarande någonting jag blickar på. Uppåt motstånd. Vi kommer ha tufft motstånd vid 20 med och runt här 167. Följt av 173 ungefär och där. Så det är väl de nivåerna jag har haft koll på uppåt. Ifall vi börjar trycka på nu i G5. Att vi har motstånd med 167. Bryter vi den, så tar vi oss nu mot 173 i alla fall. Där kan det bli lite tuffare. Skulle den brytas, ja, men då kan ni jobba sig mot 178. Men de här två motstånden blir de första intressanta att hålla koll på. Så G5, nere i intressant stödzon. Ska bli intressant att se nu hur den fortsätter dagarna. Och möjligtvis kanske bjuder på någon bättre möjlighet. Vad ska vi säga? Olja. Vi kan kolla typ Discorden också. Intrum. Jag ska se Intrum. Intrum ser fortfarande bearish ut. Jag ser ingenting positivt ut. Jag ser ingenting positivt med den här grafen. Vi ska se hur vi hade denna. Hur var den så? Jag ser ingenting positivt i den här grafen i Intrum. Jag tycker det ser bearish ut. Ingenting som jag tycker signalerar någonting positivt. Jag har hittat ut 50 här nivån. Jag tror det är där det finns bra stöd. Och det har jag sagt innan. Det var länge sedan jag pratade om Intrum nu. Det var nog någon månad sedan. Men jag har kvar samma syn där. Jag tycker inte Intrum är intressant på de här nivåerna. Jag tycker inte den är tillräckligt nedtryckt. Även fast den är väldigt mycket nere. Så tror jag att det finns mer negativitet. Kan finnas mer nedsida. Kan den studsa lite här? Ja, det kan den. Men om jag personligen skulle ta en trade, så vill jag ha ner den till 50 nivån här. Där har vi väldigt bra stöd. Och där kan det bli en bra trade i Intrum. Här nu känns det lite 50-50. Ingenting jag gillar jättemycket faktiskt. Så jag har nu varit fortsatt bearish här. Vi ser lägre toppar, lägre bottnar fortsatt i Intrum. Så jag hade fortfarande varit bearish, och just 50 nivån, det är där jag personligen skulle kunna blicka för lite longs. Där har vi väldigt bra stöd. Det är nog den nivån som jag hade avvaktat lite till personligen. Vi ska se. NIO. Låt oss ta ett kik på NIO. Vi föll hårt igår. 17% igår. Vi ska se här. Vi kommer ha den nyheten här. Bara kan ta upp den enkelt. Där har vi det. So NIO shares falls on plans to raise 1 billion via convertible bonds. NIO's Hong Kong shares fell in early Asia trading Wednesday following an overnight drop in US listed dispository shares of the Chinese electric vehicle makers said it would raise 1 billion via issues of convertible bonds. Så de har syn mer pengar i NIO, vilket är absolut inte någonting marknaden gillar här. NIO's raising 500 million via the issues of convertible senior notes due 2029 and 500 million due 2030. Ränta. Så faller hårt på att de ska ta in mer pengar. Jag har faktiskt inte läst nyheten än. Detta är faktiskt första gången jag ser den. Så jag måste sätta mig in lite djup på situationen. Men tog in $1 miljard, någonting marknaden inte gillar överhuvudtaget, som vi ser här nu. Och då är frågan, vad finns nästa stöd och motstånd som blir lite extra intressant. Nyheten måste jag läsa på mig lite mer för just kommentera kring nyheten, för jag är inte helt insatt i allting kring den. Men det här ser ju bearish ut. Jag tyckte det såg väldigt fint ut här uppe, väldigt positivt, och så ut som vi skulle göra en fin återhämtning. Sen så kom den här nyheten då, ingenting som man direkt hade kunnat säga innan. Så. Men här nu, vi har en intressant nivå här vid 9, men det ser ut att vara tuff. Spontant så ser det här nästan bearish ut i 9, vill jag nog tycka. Det är jättesvårt att säga då den här precis kom. Det är möjligtvis att den köps upp direkt igen eller den säljer av igen, för vi har inga motstånd eller stöd här direkt att gå på. Väldigt svårt att säga exakt här. Vi har den här nivån här, men vi har gått under den nu för tillfället. Så jag har nog varit lite övervägande bearish att den kanske vill falla ner hit mot 7,8. De här tidiga låsen här nere. Men spontant, tradingmässigt inte jätteintressant än. Det kan nu dyka upp lite bra möjligheter igen. Långsiktigt så kommer jag nog faktiskt kolla på att köpa lite i NIO. Jag vill gilla NIO långsiktigt, vill investera lite i bolaget. Så jag kan nog kolla faktiskt lite på att köpa lite i NIO långsiktigt. Jag måste bara sätta mig in lite mer kring den här nyheten och vad allting betyder och alla, inte regler, men alla terms kring det. Så nivån har haft utkik på 9 här. Det är 7,8 neråt och runt den här 9 nivån som är tuff för tillfället. Jobbar vi oss upp i det här gapet här igen, ja men då testar vi nog den här nivån här. Men jag ser inga long trades som jag gillar här. Skulle jag gå long trade så hade jag behövt vänta ner till, ja men runt nivån här nere, runt 8 ungefär. Där hade jag kunnat kika longs, men innan det är lite 50-50 här nu. Vi får se lite hur marknaden smälter nyheten, helt enkelt. Så. Då ska vi se, vad var vi då? Celsius droppar, jag tror verkligen att det borde långsiktigt, kanske är det snart. Jag drack faktiskt en Celsius i morse. Men låt oss kika på Celsius. Celsius Holdings. Vi faller 7%, men den är en extremt overextended. Den här alltså det här är en jävla resa alltså. Från $3 covid lows upp till $200 nu. Det är en galen resa. Och personligen, om jag skulle vara intresserad av Celsius långsiktigt, så hade jag behövt en större dipp. Jag hade behövt få neråt till botten på den här channeln. Och vi ser, det har hänt tidigare, 2021. Här fick vi dropp på ungefär 60% från toppen till botten. Just nu är vi i mitten ungefär. Och skulle vi ta oss från mitten ner hit här, så hade det varit en slice på ungefär 50%. Så tradingmässigt så kan du dyka upp möjligheter lite hela tiden. Men det första starka stödnivån som jag hade blickat lite på, det hade nu varit här vid 147. 147. Så det är första nivån jag har kikat på, men optimalt hade ju varit att få ner Celsius till botten på den här större channeln och ner här till 107 ungefär. Men de här två nivåerna, väldigt intressant att hålla koll på. Vi sätter en nivå här vid toppen också. Ser absolut ut som det kan falla mer. Här vid 147, där hade jag verkligen haft lite utkik. Där kan jag faktiskt tänka mig att ta lite long trades själv faktiskt. Vid 147, då har vi ett fall från toppen här nu på ungefär en 20-30%, 30% ungefär, en fin retracement, stort stöd med gap. Så 147 hade nog blickat på först och främst. Bryter vi den, ja men då ska vi nog ner mot 107 på sikt. Men 147 nivån, det är där som jag personligen hade velat, där jag hade kollat lite långt i alla fall, om vi kan komma ner dit. SBB, hur ser SBB ut idag då? Fortsätter studsa lite på sina lows här. Fjärde gången den testade här. Studsa lite, kan förmodligen testa 20 med här, men spontant ingenting som ser positivt ut här. Och som jag sagt tidigare, SBB kommer bara fortsätta trenda neråt, skulle jag tro, tills att de gör någon stor försäljning eller något stort som verkligen drar in mycket likviditet i bolaget, betalar av några större lån, säljer av stora fastighetsportföljer. Kan de göra det, ja, men då tror jag på att vi kan börja återhämta oss lite. Annars så kommer vi se det här, nu har de sålt en fastighet, nu pumpar vi 5, 10 och 20% snabbt, men sen kommer det säljas av igen för att problemet kvarstår. Så SBB, vi kommer förmodligen bara se att det fortsätter att trenda neråt helt enkelt, tills vi ser någonting större som verkligen stärker bolagets kassa på riktigt. Så ja, det är min syn där. Starbreeze. Lansering som Payday Free imorgon. Var inte det en fullständig failure med deras lansering? Jag tyckte jag läste någonting att de misslyckades helt med lanseringen. Vi ska se, Starbreeze Payday Free lansering fail. Early access crashes servers. Payday free servers go down instantly as players are unable. Så det var, som jag trodde, den skulle lanseras för 2-3 dagar sedan. Early access gick ner. Okej då. De som hade early access kraschade servrarna. Och det kan väl kanske också vara något positivt. Jag vet inte hur många, om det är så pass många som vill spela spelet så att det kraschar. Så att det kraschar, visst det är negativt, men det kan faktiskt också vara positivt att det är så pass stort intresse för spelet att de kraschar servrarna. Så låter negativt, men nu när jag väl tänker lite så kan det ju faktiskt vara positivt på sikt att det är många som vill spela det och att det är så pass stort tryck än vad man tidigare trott. Så kan absolut vara intressant kanske. Men jag faller initialt på det, att servrarna kraschar. Och det enda man kan göra är att hålla koll på stödnivåerna och motstånd. Som sagt, det är en mindre svensk aktie, så det gäller ju att hålla koll där. Spontant så är det väl, vi har stöd här nu, här vid 0,78 ungefär, som kan få det att studsa lite, det är inte omöjligt. Vi kommer ha motstånd här nu och följt av där. Så någonting i den här stilen är väl det som man vill hålla koll på i Starbreeze. Bryter vi 0,78, ja men då ska vi nu direkt ner mot 0,7 eller 0,65 skulle jag nog tro direkt. Igen, håller den här nivån, ja men då ska vi nu på testa 0,8. Jobbas vi in i gapet här, då går vi nu upp och fyller det. Men som sagt, verkar vara så mycket hänger på just att här lanseringen av spelet blir bra och att folk vill spela det på riktigt och det funkar helt enkelt. Så mycket press då på releasen imorgon och hoppas att det inte kraschar för mycket, för då kan det absolut börja falla mer i priset. Men de här nivåerna här, det som jag vill ha koll på just nu, så ser det väl inte extremt positivt ut. Kan studsa lite här, men hur det spelet kommer ut kommer nog vara direkt avgörande för priset. Vad har vi? BE Semiconductor. BE Semiconductor. Skicka gärna vilken ticker det är, för jag har ingen aning vilket BE Semiconductor är. Om du kan skicka tickern så jag bara kan skriva in den. Kinnevik, låt oss skicka Kinnevik. Kinnevik. Faller ganska hårt. Är vi nere vid något stöd än? Nej, det är vi inte. Inget bra stöd i alla fall. Vi kommer ha hyfsat stöd vid nivån här vid 110. Men förmodligen mot 100 blir nog mest intressant. Och sedan Kobe slår vid 78. Så väldigt, väldigt översåld. Mycket möjligt kanske att det kan studsa lite. Men jag skulle förvänta mig att den fortsätter trenda neråt. För den är inte något jättestarkt stöd nu. Och vi brukar oftast vända vid de här bättre stödnivåerna. Kan möjligtvis studsa lite här. Men skulle nog förvänta mig lite mer nedsida. Skulle haft koll på 110 nivån respektive 100 nivån här. För lite bättre stöd. Så ser bearish ut, kan studsa lite här. Hade nog haft mer koll på 100 och 110 nivån för lite bättre stöd och kanske lite långs. Disney för short långsiktigt. Shorta långsiktigt, det var något nytt. Nej, det är klart man kan göra det också, men vi ska se. Disney. Lite negativ trend för tillfället. Så kommer förmodligen fortsätta lite där. Finns bra stöd här vid 79, 78 till 80 nivån. Jag skulle nog förvänta mig att den här nivån håller. Det är en väldigt, väldigt bra nivå. Skulle den nivån brytas, då har vi inget stöd direkt förrän zonen här skulle jag säga. Så finns faktiskt ganska bra stöd i Disney här. Det är mycket möjligt att det håller. Det var covid-låsen här 2020. Sedan så testade vi 2014. Så den har inte varit under de nivåerna sedan 2014. Så ska vi bryta neråt där nu så tror jag det kommer krävas ganska mycket. Så jag tror nog det finns ganska bra stöd där i Disney som kan hålla. Men som sagt, skulle vi bryta den här ändå, då ser det väldigt, väldigt bearish ut att vi ska ner mot i alla fall 70. Men spontant så tror jag nog ändå att nivån kan hålla här för tillfället. Jag ska se. Saab. Jag kikar Saab. Jag vet att de har gjort lite bra återhämtning de senaste veckorna. Säljer av lite hårdare idag. Ungefär 4% neråt. Och det ser väl ganska bearish ut spontant just nu. Ser ut som vi ska ner hit mot... Jag tar bort alla de här faktiskt. Tidigare channeln hade vi ungefär någonting i den stilen. Ungefär. Retesta här nu faktiskt precis på taket. Så vi får se om här blir någon reaktion nu. Det är möjligtvis att här kan bli lite stöd. Men spontant så tycker jag det ser lite bearish ut. Jag har nu haft koll att den kanske vill ner hit mot 50. Så man kan ha lite utkik här på stöd. Det är ingenting jag hade långat, men det är möjligt att priset vänder. Hade vi kunnat komma ner till 5,50, då tycker jag det börjar bli lite mer intressant. Så det är väl det jag har haft utkik på. Ta dem 2 minuter. Tack för påminnelsen. Vi ska vara redo för det snart. Vi hinner några till. Eller 1-2 till kanske. Monters Group. Vad är det här? En aktie som är uppe på all time high nivåer. Det är alltid svårt att säga vid all time highs. Jag tycker det här ser bullish ut. Det här ser ut som en aktie som vill fortsätta pusha på uppåt. Och jag tycker det ser bullish ut. Är det någonting jag hade långat? Nej, det hade jag inte. Gått upp mycket nu. Kan man absolut pusha på lite till. Och sen har vi inga nivåer att gå på uppåt. Så där kan vi inte säga någonting. Det enda jag kan bidra med är att vill man hålla koll på stödnivåer neråt, så är det nog de här de här 3 nivåerna som är mest intressant att hålla utkik på ifall vi börjar falla lite helt enkelt. Så jag skulle säga, börjar vi falla, håll koll på de här nivåerna. Där finns det bra stöd uppåt nu. Jag tycker det ser ganska positivt ut. Vi har inga nivåer att gå på då vi närmar oss all time highs. Och vi hinner med en sista. SINCH säger 2 gånger i chatten, så låt oss slänga in SINCH. Och SINCH ser bearish ut i min syn. Vi ser bearish ut här i SINCH. Och jag skulle förvänta mig att vi fortsätter falla faktiskt. Vi vi återhämtar oss lite idag. Jag tror absolut vi kan återhämta oss kanske lite till upp mot 21, 22 här. Kanske även upp här mot 22,5, inte omöjligt. Men efter det så skulle jag nog förvänta mig att den fortsätter neråt. Jag tycker det här ser bearish ut. Vi hade en channel här som började byggas upp. Den bröts här. Här blev det väldigt bearish. Och vi ser fortfarande lägre toppar, lägre bottnar. Så jag skulle nog förvänta mig att det bara fortsätta trenda neråt i SINCH här. Lite studsar nu kanske, men efter det skulle jag ändå förvänta mig att den fortsätter neråt. Vi ska se om talet har börjat än. Vi ska se. Där ja. Då ska vi se. Där har vi Powell. Har han börjat än? Ja.
We will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions.
Ja, det började nu precis.
Since early last year, the FOMC has significantly tightened the stance of monetary policy. We've raised our policy interest rate by 5.25 percentage points and have continued to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace. We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our tightening have yet to be felt. Today, we decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings. Looking ahead, we are in a position to proceed carefully in determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate. Our decisions will be based on our ongoing assessments of the incoming data and the evolving outlook and risks. I will have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has been expanding at a solid pace. And so far this year, growth in real GDP has come in above expectations. Recent readings on consumer spending have been particularly robust. Activity in the housing sector has picked up somewhat, though it remains well below levels of a year ago, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. In our Summary of Economic Projections, or SEP, committee participants revised up their assessments of real GDP growth, with the median for this year now at 2.1%. Participants expect growth to cool, with the median projection falling to 1.5% next year. The labor market remains tight, but supply and demand conditions continue to come into better balance. Over the past 3 months, payroll job gains averaged 150,000 jobs per month, a strong pace that is nevertheless well below that seen earlier in the year. The unemployment rate ticked up in August, but remains low at 3.8%. The labor force participation rate has moved up since late last year, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54 years. Nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year. Although the jobs to workers gap has narrowed, labor demand still exceeds the supply of available workers. FOMC participants expect the rebalancing in the labor market to continue, easing upward pressures on inflation. The median unemployment rate projection in the SEP rises from 3.8% at the end of this year to 4.1% over the next 2 years. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%. 4% over the 12 months ending in August, and that excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 3.9%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year, and longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. Nevertheless, the process of getting inflation sustainably down to 2% has a long way to go. The median projection in the SEP for total PCE inflation is 3.3% this year, falls to 2.5% next year, and reaches 2% in 2026. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. As I noted earlier, since early last year, we have raised our policy rate by 5.25 percentage points. We see the current stance of monetary policy as restrictive, putting downward pressure on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. In addition, it's from tighter credit conditions for households and businesses. Range for the federal funds rate at 5.25 to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. We are committed to achieving and sustaining a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to our 2% goal over time. In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward. If the economy evolves as projected, the median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 5.6% at the end of this year, 5.1% at the end of 2024, and 3.9% at the end of 2025. Compared with our June summary of economic projections, the median projection is unrevised for the end of this year, but has moved up by a half percentage point at the end of the next 2 years. These projections, of course, are not a committee's decision or plan. If the economy does not evolve as projected, the path of policy will adjust as appropriate to foster our maximum employment and price stability goals. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting based on the totality of the incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation, as well as the balance of risks. Given how far we have come, we are in a position to proceed carefully as we assess the incoming data and the evolving outlook and risks. Real interest rates now are well above mainstream estimates of the neutral policy rate, but we are mindful of the inherent uncertainties in precisely gauging the stance of policy. We're prepared to raise rates further if appropriate, and we intend to hold policy at a restrictive level until we're confident that inflation is moving down sustainably toward our objective. In determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. What makes the committee inclined to think that the Fed funds rate at this level is not yet sufficiently restrictive, especially when officials are forecasting a slightly more benign inflation outlook for this year? There's noted uncertainty about policy lags. Headwinds have emerged from the looming government shutdown, the end of federal child care funding, resumption of student debt payments, things of that nature.
So I guess I would characterize the situation a little bit differently. So we decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate where it is at 5.25% to 5.5%, while continuing to reduce our securities holdings. And we say we're committed to achieving and sustaining a stance of monetary policy that's sufficiently restrictive to bring down inflation to 2% over time. We said that. But the fact that we decided to maintain the policy rate at this meeting doesn't mean that we've decided that we have or have not at this time reached that stance of monetary policy that we're seeking. If you looked at the SEP, as you obviously will have done, you will see that a majority of participants believe that it is more likely than not that it will be appropriate for us to raise rates one more time in the 2 remaining meetings this year. Others believe that we have already reached that. So it's something where we're not making a decision by deciding to about that question by deciding to just maintain the rate and await further data.
So right now, it's still an open question about sufficiently restrictive. You're not saying today that we've reached this level.
We're not saying, yeah, no. Clearly, what we decided to do is maintain the policy rate and await further data. We want to see convincing evidence, really, that we have reached the appropriate level, and you know, we're seeing progress, and we welcome that. But you know, we need to see more progress before we'll be willing to reach that conclusion.
And just on the 2024 projections, what's behind that shallower path for interest rate cuts and the need for real rates to be 50 basis points higher?
Right. So I would say it this way. First of all, real interest rates are positive now. They're meaningfully positive. And that's a good thing. We need policy to be restrictive so that we can get inflation down to target, okay? And we're going to need that to remain to be the case for some time. So I think, you know, remember that of course, the SEP is not a plan that is negotiated or discussed really as a plan. It's accumulation, really, and what you see are the medians. It's accumulation of individual forecasts from 19 people, and then what you're seeing are the medians. So I wouldn't want to, you know, bestow upon it the idea that it's really a plan. But what it reflects, though, is that economic activity has been stronger than we expected, stronger than I think everyone expected. And so what you're seeing is this is what people believe as of now will be appropriate to achieve what we're looking to achieve, which is progress toward our inflation goal, as you see in the SEP.
Thanks. Let's go to Rachel.
Hi, Chair Powell. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. How would you characterize the debate around another hike or holding steady? Is it discussion around lag times, fear of too much slowing, too little slowing? Could you walk us through what this disagreement was about at the meeting?
Yeah, so the proposal at the meeting was to maintain our current policy stance. And I think there was obviously unanimous support for that. But this, of course, is an SEP meeting, and so people write down what they think. And you have some, you saw, I think 7 wrote down no hike at this meeting, or between now and the end of the year, and I think 12 wrote down another single hike in one of the next 2 meetings that we have between the end of the year. So it wasn't like we were arguing over that. People just stating their positions. And really what people are saying is, let's see how the data come in. You know, we want to see, you know what we want to see. We want to see that these good inflation readings that we've been seeing for the last 3 months, we want to see that it's more than just 3 months, right? We want to see, you know, the labor market report that we received, the last one that we received, was a good example of what we do want to see. It was a combination of across a broad range of indicators, continuing rebalancing of the labor market. So those are the 2 things. Those are our 2 mandate variables, and that's the progress that we want to see. But I think people, they want to be convinced, you know, they want to be careful not to jump to a conclusion really one way or the other, but just be convinced that the data, you know, support that conclusion. And that's why, given how far we've come and how quickly we've come, we're actually in a position to be able to proceed carefully as we assess the incoming data and the evolving outlooks and risks and make these decisions meeting by meeting.
I see. And in your view, I know nothing has been decided yet, but what would one more hike at the end of the year do to the economy or to inflation? And on the other side, what would no hike do, if you could sort of game that out for us?
So, you know, you can make the argument that one hike one way or the other won't matter, but for us, we're trying, obviously as a group, it's a pretty tight cluster of where we think that policy stance might be, but we're always going to be learning from data. You know, we've learned all through the course of the last year that actually we needed to go further than we had thought. If you go back a year and what we wrote down, it's actually gotten higher and higher. So we don't really know and that's why, again, we're in a position to proceed carefully at this point. A year ago, we proceeded pretty quickly to get rates up. Now we're fairly close, we think, to where we need to get. It's just a question of reaching the right stance. I wouldn't attribute huge importance to one hike in macroeconomic terms. Nonetheless, you know, we need to get to a place where we're confident that we have a stance that will bring inflation down to 2% over time. That's what we need to get to, and we've been moving toward it. As we've gotten closer to it, we've slowed the pace at which we've moved. I think that was appropriate. And now that we're getting closer, we have the ability to proceed carefully.
Let's go to Steve.
Steve Leisman, CNBC. Mr. Chairman, I want to return to Colby's question here. What is it saying about the committee's view of the inflation dynamic in the economy that you achieve the same forecast inflation rate for next year, but need another ½ point of the funds rate on it? Does it tell you that, does it tell us that the committee believes inflation to be more persistent, requires more medicine effectively? And I guess a related question is, if you're going to project a funds rate above the longer run rate for 4 years in a row, at what point do we start to think, hey, maybe the longer rate or the neutral rate is actually higher? Thank you.
So I guess I would point more to, rather than pointing to a sense of inflation having become more persistent, I wouldn't think that's not, we've seen inflation be more persistent over the course of the past year, but I wouldn't say that's something that's appeared in the recent data. It's more about stronger economic activity, I would say. So if I had to attribute one thing, again, we're picking medians here and trying to attribute one explanation, but I think broadly, stronger economic activity means rates, we have to do more with rates, and that's what that meaning is telling you. In terms of what the neutral rate can be, you know, we know it by its works. We only know it by its works, really. We can't you know, the model. We can't, you know, the model and that the economy reacts. And again, that's another reason why we're moving carefully now, because, you know, there are lags here. So it may of course be that the neutral rate has risen. You do see people. You don't see the median moving, but you do see people raising their estimates of the neutral rate. And it's certainly plausible that the neutral rate is higher than the longer run rate. Remember, what we write down in the SEP is the longer run rate. It is certainly possible that, you know, that the neutral rate at this moment is higher than that. And that's part of the explanation for why the economy has been more resilient than expected.
Howard Schneider with Reuters, thank you. So you've said several times that the economy needed a period of below trend growth to get inflation consistently back to 2%. You kind of get that in 2024, a little bit, 1.5% is just a touch below what's the estimate of potential. So the fact that you're getting so much done at so much less cost, does that represent a change in how you think inflation works, a change in how you think the economy works, a change in the mix of supply healing versus demand destruction that's necessary to achieve this?
Yes, of course, it is a good thing that we've seen now meaningful rebalancing in the labor market without an increase in unemployment, and that's because we're seeing that rebalancing in other places, in, for example, job openings, and in the jobs worker gap. You're also seeing supply side things, so that's happening. I would say, though, I still think, and I think broadly people still think, that there'll have to be some softening in the labor market. That can come through more supply, as we've seen as well. Also, remember, the natural rate, we think, is coming down, which is a supply side thing, so that the gap between any given unemployment rate that's lower than that and the natural rate comes down. That's a way for that's a way for the labor market to achieve a better balance. So all of those things are happening. You're right, in the median forecast, we don't see a big increase in unemployment. We do see an increase, and but that really is just playing forward the trends that we've been seeing. That is not guaranteed. There may come a time when unemployment goes up more than that, but that's really what we've been seeing, is progress without higher unemployment for now.
So just to boil that down for a second, you know, we've gone from a very narrow path to a soft landing to something different. Would you call the soft landing now a baseline expectation?
No, I would not do that. I would just say, what would I say about that? I've always thought that the soft landing was a plausible outcome, that there was a path, really, to a soft landing. I've thought that, and I've said that since we lifted off. It's also possible that the path has narrowed and it's widened, apparently. Ultimately, this may be decided by factors that are outside our control at the end of the day. But I do think it's possible, and you know, I also think you know, this is why we're in a position to move carefully again. That we will restore price stability. We know that we have to do that, and we know the public depends on us doing that. And we know that we have to do it so that we can achieve the kind of labor market that we all want to achieve, which is an extended period, sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. We know that. The fact that we've come this far lets us really proceed carefully, as I keep saying. So I think you know, that's the end we're trying to achieve. I wouldn't want to handicap the likelihood of it, though. It's not up to me to do that.
Nick Timmeros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, both you and Vice Chair Williams have indicated that sufficiently restrictive will be judged on a real rather than nominal basis, implying some scope for nominal rate cuts next year, provided further compelling evidence that price pressures will continue to subside. Is the FOMC focused on targeting a real level of policy restriction? And can you explain what would constitute enough evidence that will allow the FOMC to normalize the nominal stance of policy while keeping real policy settings sufficiently restrictive?
I mean, yes, we understand that it's a real rate that will matter and that it needs to be sufficiently restrictive. Again, I would say you know sufficiently restrictive only when you see it. It's not something you can arrive at with confidence in a model or in various estimates, you know. And so what are we seeing? We're seeing, you know, through a combination of the, you know, the unwinding of the pandemic-related demand and supply distortions and monetary policy's work in suppressing demand or alleviating very high demand. The combination of those two things is actually working. You're seeing, you know, inflation coming down. It's principally now in goods, also in housing services. You begin to see effects of it in non-housing services as well. So we think that is working. And I think, what, you know, as we've said, we want to reach that. We want to reach something that we're confident it gets us to that level. And I think confidence comes from seeing, you know, enough data that you feel like, yes, okay, this feels like we can for now decide that this is the right level and just agree to stay here. We're not permanently deciding not to go higher, but we would, let's say, if we get to that level. And then the question is, how long do you stay at that level? And that's a whole other set of questions. For now, the question is trying to find that level where we think we can stay there. And we haven't gotten to a point to stay there. And we haven't gotten to a point. That's the stage
this year. And even then, it seems possible that core PCE inflation could come in even lower than the median at 3.7%. Would you see a case to raise rates still if it turned out that you were going to achieve the same real rate this year because the decline in inflation proceeds somewhat better than you currently anticipate?
The decision that we make at each meeting, and certainly at the last two meetings this year, it's going to depend on the totality of all the data. So the inflation data, the labor market data, the growth data, the balance of risks and the other events that are happening out there. We take all of that into account. So I can't really answer a hypothetical about one piece of that. It'll be trying to reach a judgment over whether we should move forward with another rate hike overall, and whether that would increase our confidence that yes, this is an appropriate move, and it will help us be more confident that we've gotten to the level that we need to get to.
Gina.
Thanks, Chair Powell. Following up on Nick's question, actually, John Williams, the New York Fed president, obviously, has said things to the effect of next year, as we see inflation, kind of, again, to Nick's point, as we see inflation coming down, we're going to need to reduce interest rates to make sure that we're not squeezing the economy harder and harder over time. And I wonder if that's basically the logic that you apply. You know, is that how you think about it? And then I also wonder, in the last press conference, you said something to the effect of, you know, it's a full year out, those discussions, and people interpreted that to mean that you didn't see a possibility of a rate cut in the first half of next year. And I wonder if that was what you meant by that, or whether, you know, how you're thinking about that timing.
No, when I answer these questions about hypotheticals about cutting, I'm never intending to send a signal about timing. I'm just answering them as the question is expressed. So please, I wouldn't want to be taken that way. Sorry, the first question was that how? Yeah, so we're, as we go into next year, that's the question we'll be asking is, you know, taking into account lags and everything else we know about the economy and everything we know about monetary policy. The time will come at some point, and I'm not saying when, that it's appropriate to cut. Part of that may be that real rates are rising because inflation is coming down. Part of it just may be that it'll be all the factors that we see in the economy. And, you know, that time will certainly come at some point. And what you see is us writing down, you know, a year ahead estimates of what that might be. And, you know, there's so much uncertainty around that. When we, in the moment, we'll do what we think makes sense. No one will look back at this and say, hey, we made a plan. It's not like that at all. These are estimates made a year in advance that are highly uncertain, and that's how it is.
Neil.
Thanks so much, Chair Powell. Neil Irwin with Axios. I wonder, how do you think about the question of whether the strong GDP growth that we've been seeing is driven by excess demand versus supply-side factors, productivity, labor force growth? And relatedly, if GDP keeps coming in hot, even in the absence of inflation resurgence, would that on its own be a reason to consider more tightening?
So on your first question, I mean, we're looking at GDP very, very carefully to try to understand really what's the direction of it, what's driving it, and it's a lot of consumer spending. You know, the consumer's been very robust in spending. So that is, you know, that's how we're looking at it. Sorry, your second question was?
There's GDP stays hot, but without inflation.
So I think the question will be, GDP is not a mandate, right? Maximum employment and price stability are the mandates. The question will be, is GDP, is the heat that we see in GDP, is it really a threat to our ability to get back to 2% inflation? That's going to be the question. It's not a question about GDP on its own. It's, you know, you're expecting to see this improvement, you know, continued rebalancing in the labor market and inflation moving back down to 2% in a sustainable way. We have to have confidence in that, and, you know, we'd be looking at GDP just to the extent that it threatens one or both of those.
Victoria.
Hi, Victoria Guida with Politico. There are multiple external factors that are playing out right now. We see rising oil prices, we see auto workers striking, there's the looming, very real possibility of a government shutdown. And I was just wondering, for each of those things, could you talk about how you're thinking about how that might affect the course for the Fed and the economy?
So there is a long list, and you hit some of them, but you know, it's the strike, it's government shutdown, resumption of student loan payments, higher long-term rates, oil price shock. You know, there are a lot of things that you can look at, and you know, so what we try to do is assess all of them and handicap all of them. And ultimately, though, there's so much uncertainty around these things. I mean, to start with the strike, first of all, we absolutely don't comment on the strike, as we have no view on the strike one way or the other, but we do have to make an assessment of its economic effects to do our jobs. So, you know, the thing about it is so uncertain. It will depend. The economic effects, it could affect, we've looked back at history, it could affect economic output, hiring, and inflation, but that's really going to depend on how broad it is and how long it's sustained for. And then it also depends on how quickly production can make up for lost production. So none of those things are known right now. It's very, very hard to know. So you just have to leave that uncertain and No, so you just have to leave that uncertain and hard to know. So you just have to leave that uncertain and we'll be learning, I think, over the course of the next intermeeting period. It hasn't traditionally had much of a macroeconomic effect. You know, energy prices being higher, that is a significant thing. Energy prices being up can affect spending. It can affect over time. A sustained period of higher energy prices can affect consumer expectations about inflation. We tend to look through short-term volatility and look at core inflation. But so the question is, how long are higher prices sustained? We have to take those macroeconomic effects into account as well. Those are some of them. I'm not sure if I hit them all, but I mean, ultimately, you know, you're coming into this with an economy that appears to have significant momentum, and that's what we start with. But we do have this collection of risks that you mentioned.
Craig Torres from Bloomberg News. I was a little surprised, Chair Powell, to hear you say that a soft landing is not a primary objective. This economy is seeing added supply in a way that could create long-term inflation stability. We have prime age labor force participation moving up where people can add skills. Workers want to work. We have a boom in manufacturing construction. We've had a decent spate of home building. And since inflation's coming down with strong GDP growth, we may have higher productivity. All are which good for the Fed's longer run target of low inflation. And if we lose that in a recession, aren't we opting for the awful hysteresis that we had in 2010? So are you taking this into account as you pursue policy? Thank you.
To begin, a soft landing is a primary objective, and I did not say otherwise.
Okay. All right.
I mean, that's what we've been trying to achieve for all this time. The real point, though, is the worst thing we can do is to fail to restore price stability, because the record is clear on that. If you don't restore price stability, inflation comes back, and you go through, you can have a long period where the economy is just very uncertain, and it'll affect growth, it'll affect all kinds of things. It can be a miserable period to have inflation constantly coming back and the Fed coming in and having to tighten again and again. So the best thing we can do for everyone, we believe, is to restore price stability. I think now, today, we actually, you know, we have the ability to be careful at this point and move carefully, and that's what we're planning to do. So we fully appreciate the, you know, the benefits of being able to continue what we see already, which is rebalancing in the labor market and inflation coming down without seeing, you know, an important, large increase in unemployment, which has been typical of other tightening cycles. So.
Let's go to Chris.
Hi, thank you. Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. When you look at the disinflation that has taken place so far, do you see it mostly as a result of what some economists are calling the low-hanging fruit, such as the unwinding of supply chain snarls and other pandemic disruptions, or is it more a broad disinflationary trend that involves most goods and services across the economy? Thank you.
So if I understood your question, I would say it this way. I think we knew from before when we lifted off, but certainly by the time we knew that bringing inflation back down was going to take, as I call it, the unwinding of these distortions to both supply and demand that happened because of the pandemic and the response. So that unwinding was going to be important. In addition, monetary policy was going to help. It was going to help supply side heal by cooling demand off, and just in general, better aligning supply with demand. So those two forces were always going to be important. I think it's very hard to pull them apart. They work together. I do think both of them are at work now, and I think they're at work in a way that shows you the progress that we are seeing.
Go to Mike.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television and Radio. In June, you forecast a 5 radio.
Go to Mike.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television and Radio. In June, you forecast a 5
stronger, right? Investors are a humble forecast.
Investors have, or the known unknowns that you face, is for lower inflation. And given all the known unknowns that you face, how much confidence do you have, can investors have, or the American people have in your forecasts?
Well, forecasts are highly uncertain. Forecasting is very difficult. Forecasters are a humble lot with much to be humble about. But to get to your question, though, what's happened is growth has come in stronger, right? Stronger than expected, and that's required higher rates. Unemployment, you also see that the ultimate unemployment rate is not as high, but that's really because of what we've been seeing in the labor market. We've seen more and more progress in the labor market without seeing significantly higher unemployment. So we're continuing that trend. In terms of inflation, you are seeing the last 3 readings are very, very good readings. It's only 3 readings. We were well aware that we need to see more than 3 readings. But if you look at June, July, and August, you're looking at really significant declines in core inflation, largely in the goods sector, also to some extent in housing services, and just a little in non-housing services. Those are the 3 buckets. Headline inflation, of course, has come way down, largely due to lower energy prices, some of which is now reversing. So I think people should know that economic forecasting is very difficult, and these are highly uncertain forecasts. But these are our forecasts. We have very high quality people working on these forecasts, and I think they stand up well against other forecasters. But just the nature of the business is the economy is very difficult to forecast.
Given the forecast that you have, what justified not moving? What justified not moving today, and what could justify moving in the future if you think?
Well, I think we have come very far, very fast in the rate increases that we've made. And I think it was important at the beginning that we moved quickly, and we did. And I think as we get closer to the rate that we think, the stance of monetary policy that we think is appropriate to bring inflation down to 2% over time, the risks become more two-sided. And the risk of over-tightening and the risk of under-tightening becomes more equal. And I think the natural common sense thing to do is, as you approach that, you move a little more slowly as you get closer to it. And that's what we're doing. So we're taking advantage of the fact that we have moved quickly to move a little more carefully now as we sort of find our way to the right level of restriction that we need to get inflation back down to 2%.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Jennifer Schonberger with Yahoo Finance. With your focus on year-over-year PCE, isn't it true that base effects are huge, and that by the time you meet in November, that it's more likely that you'll have a low PCE number that would make you feel more comfortable? And secondly, how would the lack of key indicators like CPI, the jobs report, impact your approach in upcoming meetings if we were to have a government shutdown? Thank you.
Yeah, I missed the first question. What was what factors?
The base factors.
Base factors, okay. So on that, we're looking at just monthly, right? You can look at just monthly readings and see what the increase was from the prior month. So you're right, when you go back 3, 6, and 12 months, you get base factors, but we can adjust for that. In terms of not getting data, again, we don't comment on government shutdowns. It's possible if there is a government shutdown and it lasts through the next meeting, then it's possible we wouldn't be getting some of the data that we would ordinarily get, and we would just have to deal with that. And I don't know. It's hard for me to say in advance how that would affect that meeting. It would depend on all kinds of factors that I don't know about now, but it's certainly a reality that's a possibility.
As those kind of fall out of the equation for the next couple of readings by November, would you feel more comfortable at that point?
Yes. I mean, if you're looking, we can tell how much inflation has gone up in a given month, right? And that's what we're looking at. And month by month, what's the reading? And I think what we're really looking at is there's a tendency to look at shorter and shorter maturities, but they're incredibly volatile and they can be misleading. That's why we look at 12-month. But I think in this situation where it looks like we've had a bit of a turn in inflation starting in June, we're also looking at 6 months and even 3 months, but really 6 months inflation. So you're looking at it over that period and over longer periods. That's the right way to go. And we don't need to be in a hurry in getting to a conclusion about what to do. We can let the data evolve.
Thanks for the question, Chair Powell. Edward Lawrence with Fox Business. So I want to focus back in on oil prices. We're seeing oil prices, as you mentioned, move up, and that's pushing the price of gas. So how does that factor into your decision to raise rates or not? Because the last two inflation reports, PCE and CPI, we've seen the overall inflation has actually risen.
Right. So, energy prices are very important for the consumer. This can affect consumer spending. It certainly can affect consumer sentiment. I mean, gas prices are one of the big things that affects consumer sentiment. It really comes down to how persistent, how sustained these energy prices are. The reason why we look at core inflation, which excludes food and energy, is that energy goes up and down like that, and it doesn't. Energy prices mostly don't contain much of a signal about how tight the economy is, and hence don't tell you much about where inflation's really going. However, we're well aware, though, that if energy prices increase and stay high, that'll have an effect on spending, and it may have an effect on consumer expectations of inflation and things like that. That's just things we have to monitor. So.
On the consumer, they're putting more and more of this on their credit card. The consumer seeing record credit spending. How long do you think the consumer can manage that debt at higher interest rates now? And are you concerned about a debt bubble related to that?
So to finish my prior thought, I was saying that's why we tend to look through energy moves that we can see as short-term volatility. Turning to consumer credit, of course we watch that carefully. Consumer distress, measures of distress among consumers were at historic lows quite recently, during and after the pandemic. They're now moving back up to normal. We're watching that carefully, but at this point, these readings they're not at troublingly high levels. They're just kind of moving back up to what was typical in the pre-pandemic era.
Hi, Jean Young with M&I Market News. Yields along the Treasury curve have risen to their highest in years. What is the Fed's view about what's been driving that increase in recent weeks? And how much of it can be attributed to macro explanations and how much to technical factors?
So you're right. Rates have moved up significantly. I think it's always hard to say precisely, but most people do a common decomposition of the increase, and the view will be it's not mostly about inflation expectations. It's mostly about other things. Either term premium or real yields, and it's hard to be precise about this. Of course, everyone's got models that'll give you a very precise answer, but they give you different answers. So, but essentially, they're moving up because it's not because of inflation. It's because it'll probably have something to do with stronger growth. I would say more supply of treasuries. The common explanations that you hear in the markets kind of make sense.
Kyle Campbell, American Banker. Thank you for taking the questions. Just two on housing. You've said slower shelter cost growth is in the pipeline and will reflect in inflation readings as new leases are signed. But there's also some questions out there about the way housing costs are measured, particularly the use of rental equivalents, which are estimates from homeowners about what their homes would rent for if they were in the rental market. So my question is, how much of the effort to tame inflation, both as it's measured and felt by the broader public, hinges on housing supply? And then as far as a constrained housing supply being sort of exacerbated by this sort of lock-in effect of mortgages being higher now than they were at their recent historic lows, how is that going to impact future thinking about taking interest rates to that lower bound in the future?
So on the supply point, of course, supply is very important over time in setting house prices and for that matter rents, and supply is kind of structurally constrained. But in terms of where inflation's going in the near term, though, as you obviously know, a lot of it is leases that are running off and then being re-signed or released at a level that's it won't be that much higher. A year ago it would have been much higher than it was a year before. Now it may be below or at the same level. So as those leases are rolling over, we're seeing what we expect, which is measured housing services inflation coming down. Your second question was the lock-ins. How much is that affecting things, really?
Is that going to affect your decisions to potentially bring rates down to their lower bound in the future, sort of creating that sort of bubble of buying and then a lock-in that sort of stagnates the housing market?
I think we look at I would look at the lock-in, the idea being that people are in very low rate mortgages, and even if they want to move now, it would be hard because the new mortgage would be so expensive. Play a role in our future decisions in a future loosening cycle about whether we would cut rates? No, I don't think it would. I mean, I don't think that's. I think we'd be looking at what fundamentally what rates does the economy need, and in an emergency like the pandemic or during the global financial crisis, you have to cut rates to the point that you have to do what you can to support the economy. So I wouldn't think that would be a reason for us not to do that. It's not something we're thinking about at all right now, but down the road I wouldn't think so.
Hi, Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. Chair Powell, you've mentioned several things that would possibly weigh on consumer confidence, maybe cut back consumer spending, possible government shutdown, high gas prices. At this point, would the Fed welcome a decrease in consumer spending? Would that help you get inflation closer to your 2% target?
I wouldn't say it that way. We're not looking for a decrease in consumer spending. It's a good thing that the economy is strong. It's a good thing that the economy has been able to hold up under the tightening that we've done. It's a good thing that the labor market's strong. The only concern, and it just means this: if the economy comes in stronger than expected, that just means we'll have to do more in terms of monetary policy to get back to 2%, because we will get back to 2%. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess on the other hand, would you worry that that could contribute to an economic slowdown or even a recession?
Well, that's always a concern. I mean, concern number one is restoring price stability, because in the long run, that's something we have to do so that we can have the kind of economy we really want, which is one with sustained period of tight labor market conditions that benefit all, as I've said a couple times. So that said, of course, we also now, given how far we've come with our rate hikes and how quickly we've come here, we do have the ability to be careful as we move forward because of that consideration.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Simon Rabinovich with The Economist. One of the factors in the economic resilience to date appears to be a lesser degree of rate sensitivity than in the past. Obviously, we've talked about households with long fixed-rate mortgages, also companies that refinanced before last year. What is your thinking about the efficacy of rates and how that's changed? And then related to that, how do you think about the distributional consequences in the sense that if you're a relatively wealthy household with a long fixed-rate mortgage, the past year has not been all that tough with rates going up, whereas if you're relying on your credit card for supporting your consumption, in fact, times are getting a lot tougher, a lot more quickly. Thanks.
So I guess it's fair to say that the economy's been stronger than many expected, given what's been happening with interest rates. Why is that? Many candidate explanations. Possibly a number of them make sense. One is just that household balance sheets and business balance sheets have been stronger than we had understood, and so that spending has held up and that kind of thing. We're not sure about that. The savings rate for consumers has come down a lot. The question is whether that's sustainable. It could just mean that the date of effect is is later. It could also be that for other reasons, the neutral rate of interest is higher for various reasons. We don't know that. It could also just be that policy hasn't been restrictive enough for long enough. And there are many candidate explanations. We have to, in all this uncertainty, make policy. And I feel like what we have right now is what's still a very strong labor market, but that's coming back into balance. We were making progress on inflation. Growth by many forecasts, many forecasts call for growth to moderate over the course of the next year. So that's where we are, and we have to deal with what comes. On your second question your second question was distributional, but can you be a little clearer about that?
Yeah, my point there was that if you're somebody who has a long fixed rate mortgage, you've been able to endure the higher rates relatively easily. If you're somebody who's living month to month off of your credit card, current financing rates are punitive.
Yes, and so the point I would make there is that we're trying to get inflation back down. The people who are most hurt by inflation are the people who are on a fixed income. If you're a person who spends all of your income, you don't really have any meaningful savings. You spend all your income on the basics of life: clothing, food, transportation, heating, the basics. And prices go up by 5, 6, 7%. You're in trouble right away. Whereas even middle class people have some savings and some ability to absorb that. So it is for those people, as much as for anybody, that we need to restore price stability. And we want to do it as quickly as possible. Obviously, we would like to do that. We'd like the current trend to continue, which is that we're making progress without seeing the kind of increase in unemployment that we've seen in past things. But you're right, though. When we raise rates, people who are, who are living on credit cards and borrowing are going to feel that more. They are, and of course, people with lots of savings also have a much lower marginal propensity to consume, and so they're not going to. It's not going to affect them as much.
Let's go to Greg Robb for the last question.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Greg Robb from MarketWatch. In the Beige Book recently, you can tell that the Fed has been surveying nonprofits and community groups about the economic health of low-income Americans, moderate-income Americans. I have two questions about this. Are you going to use that data to maybe come up with sort of like a quarterly survey of those groups, like the Senior Loan Officer Survey? And and also the second question is, from your recent readings of these surveys, how are low and moderate Americans doing? Is there this thing where like the GDP is strong because of wealthy Americans kind of driving things? And just want to get your sense of the health of that sector. Thank you.
So I don't know about the quarterly survey. That's an idea we can take away and think about. In terms of how low and moderate Americans, they're clearly we're suffering from high inflation. I think during the pandemic, the government transfers that happened were very meaningful. And if you know the surveys that we take showed that low and moderate income people were actually in very, very strong financial condition. I think now it's a very hot labor market, and you're seeing high nominal wages, and you're starting to see real wages are now positive by most measures. So I think overall households are in good shape. Surveys are a different thing. So surveys are showing dissatisfaction, and I think a lot of that is just people hate inflation, hate it. And that causes people to say the economy is terrible, but at the same time they're spending money. Their behavior is not exactly what you would expect from the surveys. That's kind of a guess at what the answer might be. But I think there's a lot of good things happening on household balance sheets, and certainly in the labor market and with wages. The biggest wage increases having gone to relatively low wage jobs, and now inflation coming down, you're seeing real wages, which is a good thing. Thanks very much.
Okej. Då var vi klara med Powell. Lite snabb recap. Det största skulle jag väl säga, det var det som jag skrev i chatten. Att Vi kommer se förmodligen en räntehöjning till. Snittet låg på runt 5,5% som de flesta förväntade sig. Vi ser att marknaderna faller ganska hårt på detta här nu. Går vi in på nasdaq, vi går in i 1 minute candles, så ser vi att vi har trendat neråt i princip sen Powell började. Powell drog igång här vid 2030. Vi har fortsatt neråt hela vägen dit där nu. Så det fanns en bra trade-möjlighet här i början. Bam, upp. Först touchen av 1500 och spontant, vi får se hur det stänger. Det här kan stänga hur som helst idag. Men stänger vi under 15100, det stänger under den här nivån, då skulle jag förvänta mig att vi kommer fortsätta neråt imorgon mot nya lows. Så spontant sett, vi får se hur vi stänger tekniskt idag. Kommer uppdateras det som sagt i Discorden inför imorgon bitti. Är du inte med i Discorden så kommer det finnas länkar överallt här och på hemsidan. Men som sagt, stänger vi likt så här under 15100, då skulle jag förvänta mig att vi går ner mot 15 000 nivån imorgon. Det ser ganska bearish ut det här just nu, så det är nog vad jag skulle förvänta mig att vi skulle fortsätta se. Så en stängning under 1500, så ligger det sannolikheten att vi ska fortsätta neråt imorgon mot nya lows i nasdaq. För S&P samma sak där. Om vi säger att den stänger men likt som den är runt här just nu, så ska vi förmodligen ner mot 4420, men förmodligen ända ner mot 440 också är mycket troligt. Och kollar vi då på OMX vad det skulle motsvara, så vi stängde vid 2200 idag. Om det nu blir så att vi håller oss negativt i de amerikanska börserna, men förväntar förmodligen att vi kommer öppna neråt mot 2190 kanske. Men jag skulle fortsätta hålla koll på 20 EMA. Kan bli lite intressant stöd runt den nivån. Så runt 2185 blir fortsatt lite intressant att hålla koll på för OMX. Men vi får se hur amerikanska börserna stänger. Kommer uppdatera det för Discorden inför morgon bitti så man är up to date. Men annars så, det var dagens webinar. Hoppas du uppskattade videon. Vi hörs i Discorden. Det var Robin Omega och jag säger ciao.